The Africa Climate Summit and its outcomes, we have with us Dr. Richard Munang, Deputy Regional Director of the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, joining us via Zoom from Nairobi. Thank you, Dr. Munang, for your time tonight. So what stood out for you in the Nairobi Declaration?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. The Africa Climate Summit highlighted an aspect that for quite a very long time, almost 28 years, have not been highlighted within the African context, which is to move away from climate liability projection to climate opportunity. And that is what the summit culminated about, that Africa, taking into consideration that it is the lungs of the world, with the Congo Basin forest sequestrating carbon that is worth 30 billion cubic meters of carbon dioxide. It therefore means that Africa provides solutions to the world. It also highlighted the aspect of youth, which is a young continent with over 70% of the entire population below the age of 30. And more importantly, with 66% of the entire world's renewable energy resource in the continent, and with 65% of uncultivated arable land. These discussions for the first time projecting Africa solutions to the world and the potential that the continent have got is actually a very important aspect. Another crucial aspect was leveraging on what Africa already got, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, to be leveraged to not only tap into opportunities, but at the same time, drive transformational value addition, especially what the continent produces using clean energy solutions to drive decarbonization. For example, because of the continent having 66% of renewable energy in the world, it means that most of the entire world will be coming to Africa to be able to add value because energy is going to be cheaper here, and that will end up creating jobs for countries because value addition creates jobs and also help Africa not to be a net exporter, but at the same time become a decarbonization pathway for the entire world.
Right. A major decision by the African leaders on carbon tax from fossil fuels. What happens next after this declaration? How does the continent push this agenda forward?
The key point to note is that the discussion on carbon tax by African leaders was to unanimously rally the continent to take the messaging to the global stage, especially up to COP28. And the point on this to note is that only 13% of African countries are an exporter of fossil fuels. It therefore means that the bulk of the continent rallying behind to be able to have a global carbon tax is an opportunity to tap into financing, because putting things in perspective, the continent of Africa needs over $3 trillion to be able to fund climate adaptation and drive a low decarbonization pathway. But yet the continent is only getting 11% each and every year, which means that 89% is nowhere to be found. And so looking for alternative sources that can bring extra finance to build resilience of communities and ensure that we can be able to leverage the opportunities that exist globally is actually a great opportunity. And that voicing for carbon tax globally is what the leaders saw as an extra opportunity to tap into finance to build resilience of communities in the continent.
Right, but we're also aware that some African countries are also reaping big from fossil fuels. Do you see this united front at the summit surviving the individual national and economic interests, and how do they overcome the challenges?
Fossil fuels are non-renewable. It means that they will get finished at some point. And the good news is that of all the 13 countries that are net exporters of fossil fuel, they are diversifying their economies, moving away to tap into adding value to the agricultural productivity, to add value, to ensure that the importation of food products in the continent, across the continent, over $35 billion can actually be reduced, because that is creating unemployment in the continent, exporting unemployment and importing unemployment and exporting employment. And one of the biggest things that was agreed in the conference is the diversification, looking at alternatives to be able to move towards a low carbon pathway. The countries that do produce fossil fuels know fully well that fossil fuels are non-renewable and they'll get finished. And therefore, diversification, in which most of these countries have put in the industrialization strategy, is actually only going to be accelerated from the perspective that if they tap into clean energy resources, a decarbonization pathway will create 85 million jobs every year. And in the continent of Africa, tapping into renewable energy resources will create 11 million jobs each and every year. Every country will definitely want to be on this path. And therefore, embracing it is what they showcase at this summit.
Dr. Richard Munang, thank you very much for speaking to us tonight.